And be like, wait your turn. Put your hand down.
He's got a talking stick.
I was gonna say a talking stick. Hi guys.
Hey.
Hello, everyone.
Was that intro awkward this time?
I feel like
we'll work on it.
Yeah, we'll work. What are we talking about?
So we're coming up with the idea of overcomplicating your training and seeing if owners are kind of making things a little bit harder than necessary. And we wanted to play with the idea of talking about, could that lead into being a little bit selfish in your training, where we're putting our human emotions first and our dog's needs second. So I kind of just wanted to chat about those things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair. I would say that overcomplicating training, well, yeah, there's certainly like some owners that maybe go into things thinking that it's going to be this really long, convoluted process. I think the biggest culprit of them probably feeling that way is because trainers make things sound way too complicated.
And social media dog trainers, like, there's just such a long list of how to solve a problem rather than just addressing the problem at hand.
Yeah. Or just so many like different techniques and ways that people do it. And I think trainers confuse like style with right and wrong.
Yeah.
I think that like there can be a million different styles and preferences that trainers use to get to the same point, but that doesn't mean that like my way is the best way to do it. It's just maybe that's a way that I prefer to do it, and I've had a lot of success doing it and honed my skill in that way, versus like the way you get to the same point could still be the right way to do it. It's just a little bit different.
Yeah, like there's a million different ways to train a dog and to get to from point A to point B. But there are just some ways that like people are plateauing and they're not seeing success because they refuse to actually address the issue at hand.
Yeah.
Or they make it just like so complicated and work on things that are not really related to things, thinking that a big popular thing right now is mindset training.
Yes.
So like having your dog have a certain mindset, which there's a lot of emphasis on that you can train out anxiety or you can train a feeling into a dog, and you can't train a dog not to feel anxious, but you can work through anxiety, if that makes sense.
Or that you should, like, as soon as you see a dog starting to get anxious or showing anxiety, you have to retreat back to where they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But, like, if you constantly stay where you're comfortable, like, that's... You're never going to address the actual issue. I mean, that's even with people.
Yeah.
Like, like you go to any life coach and they're going to be like, success is outside of your comfort zone. Like, you have to be able to push yourself a little more.
And that's I'm dealing with a dog right now like that, where, you know, taking the time to get them a little bit more comfortable and build a relationship and having them understand is ideal with a dog that has that anxiety. But there's definitely comes a limit where like it's like, okay, it's time to take those steps, you know, and pushing them through it sometimes, being that positive, like, you know, trainer aspect is going to be a good way to kind of be able to get them through those uncomfortable steps, getting them out of that comfort zone, like you were saying. So I think it's definitely something that a lot of people struggle with, that where, you know, obviously they feel bad and bringing the human emotions in. They don't want to push them or push themselves even, you know, in a way. So it definitely can be much more complicated in that sense.
It's like not always intentional. Like people don't necessarily think they're doing anything selfish and they're not trying to be.
Yeah.
But they're like they're so anxious, and then that's leading to their dog being anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it's interesting too, because it's like you said, it's like this focus and shift on like mindset training, and then you get into these really weird spheres where people are like, oh, like, you know, you need what's it called when they're doing like the grooming and they want it to be like the dog is an active participant in choosing that
like
they want it to happen.
Consent.
There's yes, yeah, like There's like a
Yeah.
word that they're using and I
I know
can't
what
think of
you're
it, but I'll
talking
think of
about.
it in a second. And basically they go into this whole weird thing where it's like, now you can't even say you're an owner of a dog anymore. You're a guardian or like this stuff where it's like the dog, and it really, when you truly look at like obedience training, if you get into that weird space of like the dog needs to like be an active participant and consent to everything that you do, then you can't even do obedience training. Because the exact definition of obedience is like, I tell you to do something and you do it.
Right.
You know, like there has to be that like dominant, subordinate relationship to a certain degree. And now we're in this weird space where it's like, you can't even say like, no, my dog will listen whether they want to or not, or you sound like a terrible person.
And that's the whole point, you know. If your dog wants to go and chase that squirrel, that's what it wants to do.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean it can do that. Doesn't mean it should do that, right?
Yeah.
And it's and that's something I run into all the time is dogs are very opportunistic. And if you let them have those choices, of course they're going to do that, you know, because that's what they want to do. So it is really important, I think, absolutely, to like have that control, you know.
Yeah, dogs are not, majority of dogs, like most dogs are like middle of the pack type personalities where they are not built to and equipped to make like leader of the pack choices. Like they don't do well with that.
Yeah.
Like one thing that I've always liked about Caesar Milan is that how he describes personalities in dogs is he's like, there are dogs that have an alpha leader of the pack mentality, and then there's majority middle of the pack dogs that just kind of function coexisting and they just, you know, kind of do their thing. And then you have like bottom of the totem pole dogs who are like, I just want everyone to like me, very passive, very submissive type dogs. And he, like, those top leader of the pack dogs, that's why there's only like usually one dominant alpha type dog in wild dog groups, because they're not common.
Right.
And if you own one of those and you don't work on having a good relationship with them of compliance and like agreement and on who is actually calling the shots, you're going to get yourself in a very dangerous position.
What are they going to do? They're going to be alpha.
Exactly.
They're going to be leader,
Exactly. And that, I mean, how do dogs outrank each other to get to the top? Through shows of aggression. That's how they do that.
And correction.
Right? And then, so if you're dealing with that type of dog, like it's a matter of safety at that point that you really get under control.
Yeah.
And then best case scenario, you have a very like weak bottom of the totem pole or middle of the pack dog. And then if you're not establishing leadership and rules and structure, then you're going to get this absurdly anxious dog who doesn't know how to lead, doesn't want to lead, but because you're not giving that information, then they feel like they have to, and then it just gets completely out of control.
And that goes back to that anxiety where it's just like a lot of times pushing them through those extra steps and showing them that like, listen to what I have to say to you, and listen to what I want you to do, and you'll be fine.
Exactly.
But if you leave them to their own emotions of being like, I am scared to walk out this house because I don't know what's going to happen, of course they're going to have that anxiety. But if they walk out knowing, all right, all I got to do is stick with this person and they'll handle the rest, it's like, cool, they've taken that leader position.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Simplifying things, there's such a beauty to just making something so bottom line. And one thing that with my clients, I have a lot of anxious dogs. In a session that we usually do is either going to Home Depot or Edgewater, where it's pretty chaotic and hectic. And people go into those scenarios and they're like, okay, the dog has to sit and down and do this and that. And I say, all we're going to focus on for the first 20 minutes is walking in a heel position. And the only thing I'm correcting your dog for is reacting to somebody if they're reactive or breaking that heel position. Because we want to make it
or doing something like
crystal
that where they get
clear.
scared. Yeah.
And once the dog starts to realize the boundary, the anxious dogs are in Home Depot and they're like, they start in their body language just like, what is
Super
this
tense.
place?
Yeah.
And then you start to see once you've set the expectation, they loosen up and the owners are like, I've never seen my dog like this.
Yeah.
And we can just stop micromanaging them in so many different ways and actually do what we're caring about. I don't want to be pulled all over the store or the park. I'm setting my boundary there, and through that we start to see the confidence build.
Yeah. I think people are scared of like actually talking about leadership anymore.
Yeah.
Like there's all this stuff that's like dominance theory is dead. It's like, is it, or is the semantics of it just different now?
It's very,
like,
dog training has become very, very liberal, and people feel like you should have no control of your dog ever.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you're going to get in a lot of trouble.
What a world.
Yeah. And it's scary because I just saw this video. It's that woman, I can't think of her name. I would say it. I'm not scared to say it. But it's that woman that has that gray pit bull. We've shared her videos back and forth every once in a while.
Sailor Jerry or something like
no,
that?
she's another one. But
Yeah.
she's the elderly woman with the aggressive blue pit bull.
Is that Toby?
Something like that, I think. I don't know. But all of this
What's
to
the
say.
point?
All of this to
Yeah.
say. She posted this video of her dog resource guarding a bone in her backyard and how she's like,
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
And she was doing yoga or something, and she's like, I didn't mean to encroach on his space.
Yeah, and she's like doing all this stuff. And then she posts a video later about how people are so obsessed with control. She's like, why is everyone so obsessed with control? Why can't people just accept the way their dogs are and manage them and live harmoniously and do all this stuff? And that is like the most dangerous information that you could ever
That
say.
would be
Like,
ideal
I'm
if it
obsessed with
worked,
control because dogs are killing people. Like, if you wanted to live with that dog, like if a person like that woman can live with that dog and manage it perfectly 100% of the time and never have any issues and not put anyone in danger, amazing. But that is not the reality for most people at this point.
No.
And we're seeing that with the uptick in how many cases we're having of aggressive dogs just being completely out of control.
You're also restricting that dog so much more. You know,
Yes.
being able to have that control really truly does give your dog so much more freedom and so much more like ability to be a dog, right?
Yeah.
You just made that video like I think yesterday or something about
with Snoop.
I'm glad that I did the training because now my dogs are free to actually be dogs.
Exactly.
You know? Whereas like that dog, like you said, it's all about management at that point. She has to be strictly micromanaging everything that dog does because
she won't correct him.
Yeah, because she won't correct it, and then something's gonna happen, and then that's when shit hits the fan. You know.
Yeah.
People make things like so much harder than they need to be. Like what sparked the idea for this topic is I saw a post that was like about your dog fence fighting, and this woman had like she's a balance trainer, which you could still balance train very poorly.
Yes.
And she had like a list of 30 things to do for fence fighting.
She's
like,
a balance trainer that panders to the people
like,
who just don't want to correct their dog.
Their correction. She's like, go out there with a long line, start practicing your bed and your recall away from the fence. And like, yes, you can do that. That's not wrong advice to give. But you could just correct your dog when it starts to bite at the fence. And then you don't have to get a long line and stand out there. And you have to realize that people are exhausted. People work full-time jobs. And the last thing, it's already hard enough to have people put in the effort sometimes with certain people that are just to go out and do all of that rather than people want a simple fix. And not necessarily is correcting your dog wants a simple fix, but by suppressing the behavior that you're seeing first, you can then begin to work on confidence around that thing. Or if your dog is fighting at the fence, we can then work on the recall after we suppress the initial behavior.
Yeah.
You know?
Sometimes you just need to remove a coping mechanism immediately. Like, this is not how you handle that emotion.
And that's
at
not
all.
mean. It's not mean to do that.
No, it's not mean to do that.
Well, because a lot of times I feel like, and I'm sure I've said this before in another podcast or something, but I feel like a lot of times the dogs don't truly think that it's a bad thing to do.
No, they don't.
No, they have no idea.
They're like, oh, a dog, let's go.
It's very
you know what I mean?
self-reinforcing to do that behavior.
So giving that correction is a clear like, maybe you shouldn't do that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, And then you can work your beds and your downs and do that stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of work through a little bit maybe more of that like impulse control or whatever, right? But at least let them know what the mistake is that they're doing or what you're trying to help them work through. Right?
Yeah. And what clarity are you offering if you're doing this roundabout way to get them not to react at the fence, but you can never truly pinpoint the exact behavior they're doing, so they end up being confused and like frustrated and anxious, where we could just be like, you're not barking at the fence. Anytime you go to rush out the fence, you're getting a pretty firm correction. But we can still do all of this fun stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's another thing that is really important, is that like when we're correcting for those behavior issues, that's all we're correcting for. That's all we care about. We're addressing one thing at a time, right? Mm-hmm. So after that correction, do whatever you want. Go and on the opposite side of the yard, or even whatever, sniff around that yard or whatever. But just don't do this one thing at a time.
Enjoy your yard and enjoy being a dog and enjoy your dog in the yard.
Yes.
I would argue that it's less confrontational to take that approach than to micromanage to the extent where it's like, you have to sit in front of me looking at me while I'm holding this treat.
Yes.
While that other dog on the other side of the fence is going nuts.
Yes, it's crazy. It's like when I was growing up, like I wore the like dumbest clothes, like the most insane outfits. Like you should look at some of these pictures of me as a kid, okay? And my mom, God bless her, she literally took the approach of like, you just have to have clothes on. I don't care what you're wearing, but we're not making it an issue. We're not making it, just put clothes on. That's it. If there was like an event we're going to where I had to look semi-nice, she'd give me like 3 options. So I could still pick, but there were boundaries, right?
Yeah.
It was like, you can wear whatever you want, but it has to be appropriate and it has to have clothes on. And it's like, I feel that way about the yard. It's like, they have so many more options. There's so much more freedom there. Just don't do that.
No, your boundaries. Yeah.
Whereas, like, when you're micromanaging a dog and you're like, I have to make them sit and hold eye contact the whole time this dog is out here and work on engagement and do all these things, because the moment they're looking anywhere else, they're reacting or they're going crazy. Like, that's so much more difficult and stressful to a dog.
That poisons your relationship with your dog because you're constantly forcing and nagging their attention rather than just naturally getting that attention through, like, setting rules and guidelines.
Oh, yeah. No, and it's interesting, too, because when I was listening to Ivan Balabanov's podcast about the science behind training and like kind of combating a lot of the studies that people use for force free and all this stuff, he even talked about how scientifically in studies it's been shown that like negative punishment, which is like removing something that the dog wants, you know, as a punishment, causes more stress hormones than positive punishment.
Yeah.
In certain cases, you know, I'm sure that, but you think about it and I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, think about like, depending on value that the dog holds in certain things, or even in humans, like taking a kid's Xbox away could be drastically more impactful for them than if they like got a spanking as a kid. Or, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. So it's like it's just all of this to say, it's just baffling to me that with such certainty, force-free people say that our way of training is more stressful, when scientifically you can't prove that. Yeah. You know, using negative punishment or those types of things can be equally as stressful to a dog. Yeah. Stress is unavoidable. Dogs are going to be stressed, you know, and you can't avoid that forever.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of these trainers, like, there's a lot of shaming of the owners. Like David was recently talking about, like there's so much like, oh, you don't care enough because you are not putting in the effort to fix this issue. Yeah. And you have to think,
maybe like, your methods just suck.
Yeah. And people don't want to do that because you're making things so much harder and making things so difficult for people to follow through and want to do your training, and they're not seeing the results because it's too much. Like a trainer, yes, you can do that and make it work, but an owner, like you have to make things crystal clear. You have to offer clarity to the dog and make it like something that they're starting to see results with pretty quickly.
Like I would say like, is there a way, say like you get a dog from a puppyhood, like even with Snoop, I'll use him as an example. Yeah. As I was raising him, is there a way to do it like with majority positive reinforcement, really heavy like management in some areas where it's important, and then kind of like doing like, yes, there is probably like in a perfect world, like a very ideal way to raise and train a dog that uses like very little punishment except in necessary instances and stuff like that. And again, if that's important to you because I have all of these very like detailed, specific, convoluted goals with Snoop of like, I want him to do high level obedience, I want him to do weight pull, I want him to do like all of these different things. So to me, I can take that convoluted approach because it makes the most sense. The average owner doesn't care. You know, they don't really care about all of that. They don't care about if correcting your dog for biting you and mouthing you is going to kill their drive, because later on down the road, what if they want to do protection? You know what I mean? Like, they don't care. That stuff doesn't matter to them. So it's like, you have to look at it from, as a trainer, again, like, what you would do with that dog is probably drastically different than what the owner needs to do with the dog. The dog needs to just not do things and then perform a few key skills, and that's it.
Yeah, you can get away with a lot more when it's your own dog, and you want to be able to, like you said, like do some sporting things, or you're raising them very intentionally. But the average pet owner, there's not a lot of intention behind raising. They're getting a pet, and then all these behaviors are surfacing, and they want to know how to solve them. They don't want to know why you shouldn't do this and that and that, and they just want an easy approach that's really doable and it feels good to them.
Yeah, having those clear instructions, the clear steps too, is really important, because it's the walking or not pulling, I guess. Most of the time being able to play with dogs and like just and not being nuts going in the house. You know? Those I feel like are usually the three big things, you know? And it is pretty easy to manage those or to help with working through those for most cases, but I think a lot of times it does get a lot more complicated with certain dogs, because a lot of times they want the perfect heel, and they want to do, have certain situations where they can greet some people, not others, and it gets, I think, a little too complicated in certain situations that they make it that way, where it's just like, just do this one thing. Just put them on the bed. They're fine. They're hanging out there.
Well, and a lot of times too, when you ask the owners, like, why is that important to you? They really can't give you an answer. It's just because the internet told them it needed to be important. I mean, we literally teach 3 commands. Come, bed, sit, or down. That's it. That's like skill-wise, that's all that your dog needs to know. Majority of what people come into training with is they think they need skills to stop behaviors. You don't need skills to stop behaviors. You need to stop the behaviors, and then here we can teach your dog some obedience and stuff like that.
And we get a lot of like dogs from other training companies at times, and I always hear from them, and they're like, this is so much simpler than what I've been learning. And they're like, I couldn't even follow through with that last trainer's program because it was so convoluted and I wasn't seeing results. And when they come here, we're like, let's fix this and that, and they're like, that's it? I started working with this, looks like a Mal mix, but really who knows what it is, but she's probably like 2 or something. This dog has gone through like 2 separate trainers, both board and trains previously. Still has not been comfortable walking this dog without the prong collar, already had an e-collar, all this kind of stuff. We literally did 1 session, and then she's like, I haven't had to use the prong collar since. And it's crazy to me. It's like, what was everybody else doing? Either in that they weren't confident in how to teach the dog an e-collar walk, or were they not confident in giving the owner the information she needed to be able to do it on her own? Either way, something was fishy there at that point.
Because clearly the dog is a fast learner.
Oh yeah, the dog was fully capable of doing it.
Whether it was just like the owner and the dog both kind of had an idea of what was going on through those last couple things, but the dots were never connected because again it gets so complicated. Whereas like now it's like you've been able to simplify it for both of them in the sense that they've been able to kind of like open that door for communication, be like, oh, this is what you wanted me to do? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't you just say so in the first place?
Yeah.
You know?
It was, and I truly think it was a matter of like, I widened the parameters for walking.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like shoulder at hip
Mm-hmm.
type of thing, and increased the consequences for those parameters. And that's literally what fixed the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was like low level, continuous stim, stimming as you're saying the command, like all this weird,
The
like
triangle
gray,
method.
yeah, the gray area stuff that was just like, just tell the dog no and correct them
Yeah.
when they get too far in front of you.
Yeah.
And then now you can go on a whole walk and not need to correct your dog again.
Yeah.
And I do find it is something that I've had some trouble with, at least, is you get a lot of those owners that have gone through one or two trainers already,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll be like kind of working them through something, and they'll be like, well, this is what we were doing and everything. And again, it overcomplicates it. So I've found that it's just really important to be like, this is what we're gonna do now.
Mm-hmm.
Like do this one thing, because this is moving forward. This is what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of times too. Again, with the internet having so many choices, or they go to trainers and they've been told different things or whatever, that even after they start seeing some success, they can still get kind of mixed up sometimes on like, well, what should I really do in this situation, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just like stick with what works, or just stick to one thing, and work with it.
Yeah. And stay
work
consistent.
work until you see that success. But I've had some situations like that where it's just like they make it too confusing for themselves.
Yes.
And it's just like, don't divert, don't go down that path, Stick with what's working, and let's go through there,
I've had a lot of clients that have done assessments because they've done training previously, and then they end up doing like a modified program with us, because most of the time, like most places who are relatively competent can teach like obedience skills. It's usually like the owner's just left like, what do I do to fix the behavioral stuff now? Or, the obedience is only semi-reliable. Or but for the most part, the dog like knows the skills, and the commands. But usually I'll like during the assessment, I'll ask them like, what did you not get where you were at that you want to get here? And that usually gives me a gauge on like, is it an owner issue? Because sometimes it is an owner issue.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just don't listen to the advice, and maybe the advice is good advice. They just aren't willing to put in the effort to implement it. Or they're hoping maybe that magically we're going to change their dog personality-wise or whatever. But truly, most of the time it is like we did training and then we just kind of ran out of follow-ups and we don't know what to do now. And like we still didn't get success with reactivity or, things like that.
Right.
So
you saw some progress,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
then it came back or whatever,
Yeah, exactly.
And another thing that I found is that, with certain dogs that go through that training as well, or for the example that you were saying that the owners is more of an owner issue, it's good to be honest with us.
Yes.
Because some people will say that they'll be like, well, we went through this training session, I did 4 sessions or whatever, and I just wasn't doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, but now these problems are back, or the problems are worse, or new problems came up, and I just weren't doing it. We appreciate the truth,
Yeah.
the honesty, but it's something where it does give us a good gauge of like, okay, so we need to simplify it, right?
Exactly,
Let's find a way
Yeah.
that's gonna motivate you to do this,
Yeah.
because clearly you care enough to come to us or to another trainer to try it again, right?
Yes.
So you have the will to, you just need to be consistent about it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's our job as the trainers to make sure that is successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have like a recurring issue of like clients like not doing the work with their dogs or not implementing it or being combative and arguing and stuff like that, it's mainly a you issue for most of the times. Like people already took the biggest step of trying to fix it by finding a trainer, seeking you out, paying all the money to do it. They're not, most people, you'll have those rare cases, but most people are not going to then squander that and just not want to listen to you the whole time.
Yeah, right.
Usually it's like a you issue, that you're overcomplicating it, that you're making them feel like incapable by either like talking down to them or, you know, I feel like I've seen that too, where I know that I felt that way in certain situations with maybe even like vet situations where you just feel like they're talking to you like you're like a child. And I'm like, listen, I don't know as much as you, but I'm capable of like understanding things. And I feel like that can happen with training sometimes too, is that we look at owners as like, oh, they just don't know anything.
Or they just don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And they belittle them and then they make them embarrassed. And you want to cultivate an environment with your clients where they feel comfortable. Comfortable enough to mess up. You know what I mean? And that they can learn from their mistakes and like kind of adjust and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've recently had like, I love the honesty, so be honest with your trainer.
Yes.
But there are people like, I didn't work on anything this week.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you have those weeks where you don't work on things, and it doesn't mean that people don't care, because I can see the effort being implied in different ways. And then I start to like get an idea of what's really important to the owner. So after like the third week of people being like, we didn't practice the bed stays, I'm kind of like, well, do I want the dog to do a bed stay? Does this owner find value in why I can still go through our program and show them and teach them the value of bed stay? I can't make them care about it. Like I had this wonderful couple that had 2 dogs, and the dog could jump all over people when they came in. And one dog, they really got good on bed stays. And the second one, they didn't care if he came up and jumped on people or came and greeted people. And I just instructed correct for jumping. But they loved when he came and greeted people at the door. And people loved this dog. So like, why?
And it doesn't sound like it was a dangerous situation for the dog to do that.
Adorable little Frenchie.
Yeah.
And he just like would wag his butt, bring them a toy. And they got so much joy out of him helping answer the door.
Yeah.
And he wasn't doing anything wrong, so why in my mind be like, no, you have to do a bed stay?
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't care about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I had a client that every week I'd be like, how did things go this week? You know, and I kind of usually ask like pinpointed like any issues with sits, beds, walking, calm, whatever. And always at bed they'd be like, I didn't really use it. You know, and I was like, listen, I don't care. You know, like if you don't use it, you don't practice it, whatever. Because at one point the woman was like, when I would ask about it, she'd be like, oh, we really need to work on those. And I'm like, but do you? Like, if you don't use it and you don't find value in it, that's fine. As long as it's not causing you a big issue. Like, and they just have this, like, dopey Great Dane puppy who's just, like, happy to be there, you know? So
Some of my dogs, like, I have multiple, and I utilize a bed stay a lot for some of them, and the others don't even know a bed stay.
Yeah.
They don't even know how to stay on the bed, and that doesn't mean that they're not trained. They do what I need them to do.
Yeah.
But I don't utilize the bed stay with all of my dogs, and that's
Do you
okay.
remember how long it was before Snoop knew anything other than Tom?
Yeah. That's like Pip. Like, she doesn't know shit. She knows come. Because that's all I wanted to really teach her.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. Right?
Yeah, like Snoop.
To you.
Because, again, like with the specificity that I wanted with his commands, I didn't want to half-ass them. So I was like, I'm not even going to start teaching them until I really can put the time into them that I wanted. So he really just knew come. He knew come and like place. Yeah. And that was really all that he needed to know for the most part, for most things.
I think like moving into like the selfishness of training, which is a delicate topic. Like nobody wants to be called out for being selfish with their dog, but specifically, I shared a video with Michelle recently that was just this long like journey with this GSP, and this dog is very high drive, and this woman like has such a miserable time owning this dog, and it's all about how bad the dog's behaviors and how whiny the dog is. And there are some videos that I watch, she's force free, that I'm just so fucking sad for this dog.
It's terrible.
Like as an owner of a GSP, and I was a teenager when I had mine, and she drove me fucking nuts. She was crazy. But I was out there every day, running her, exercising her. But this woman that we're referring to just wants to control the dog so much in a force-free way that she's like, she wouldn't look at me. She was whining on the walk, so we made her do it down before she moved anywhere until the whining stopped.
Yeah.
And you're just nagging the dog.
Yeah, and you're perpetuating the issue because you're not allowing the dog outlets to be a dog.
It's so sad. Like, I can't even, like, scroll past her anymore or scroll through her videos anymore because I'm just, like, I feel so much sadness for this dog.
Yeah, it's really sad. Because, like, the most recent one that I saw, the trainer that they're working with, I can't even fathom, but she was, like, talking about how she's like, we got to this point where I started to really look and analyze the dog's behavior when we're out in public, and I started to realize that it was fear-driven and not just, like, excitement and anxiety and all this kind of stuff. She's like, and so we started from ground zero, and now she only is in our house and our yard. And we've just completely retreated back and isolated because our trainer told us that the biggest question we need to be asking her is, are you okay? And if she's not okay, then we need to go back to where she is okay. I'm like, this is the
How does that
most
help?
absurd information that I've ever heard in my life. And, like, you have a GSP.
Yeah.
What GSP wants to live in your house and in your yard?
And it's such a restricted life because you're being selfish because you do not want to actually address the issue because you feel some type of way about offering corrections to your dog. And you're like, my dog's not going to like me anymore. Or my dog's going to be scared of the correction. And, like, I see quite the opposite. When we're able to correct the behavior, the confidence comes out.
Because, again, they know the parameters. They know the boundaries that they're working within. Like, you look at children, again, I'm not humanizing a dog, but there are aspects that are similar. You look at children that live in a very inconsistent, unpredictable home life, situation, whatever, and their behavior is erratic because they don't understand, like, when I do this, we get different responses. When I do this, I get a different response. When I do this, like, there's no predictability to it at all.
And there's no dependability.
No, they have no sense of, like, structure or boundaries or anything. And, like, with a dog, it's very similar. Like, that dog has no idea what to do, how to do it, what not to do, or anything like that. Has no respect for the owner at all. And again, respect is another one of those taboo words. Like, I want my dogs to respect me.
Yeah.
I want them to know that when I tell them to do something, that is it, you will do it. And that's just how it needs to be.
And that's not meaning that I'm constantly telling my dogs that they have to be doing something.
No.
It's that I'm shaping the life that I want with my dogs so I can give them that off-leash freedom and swimming in the lake and running off-leash because I'm able to step in and be like, you're not chasing that rabbit. You're not taking off, and those are things you cannot perform. I
had a client, an elderly woman who had a GSP, and her first lesson, she was just in tears. She was like, I have no idea what to do with this dog. The dog is constantly jumping on her, biting her. She's got, like, scars and wounds. The dog has drug her to the ground multiple times out in public, completely and utterly out of control. Like, just absurd behavior. And she's like, I cannot handle, like, probably the same stuff they're dealing with that dog on TikTok or whatever. And so at the end of the training, and she left a review for us on our website with a picture of her dog off leash at a park, in the beach, in the water, swimming. She's like, I could have never even imagined that this would have been possible. Like, walking her dog off leash, complete control. And did the dog enjoy every second of it? No. That's okay. Now this woman can keep the dog. The dog ultimately, long term, has a brilliant life. I mean, what GSP that's owned by an elderly woman who's convinced they need to do force-free training only can take their dog off leash and let it swim and run and just be crazy?
And that's what they want.
Yeah, that's what they want.
An extremely high drive dog, and I always say to people, if your GSP hasn't made you cry at one point in your life, do you even have a GSP?
Yeah.
Because they're crazy.
They're insane. They're absolutely insane.
And they're dogs that are similar to that have that drive and that mindset, and to squander that and to try to fit them into a box and control them is ending up to be so cruel when you don't want to step in and be the bigger person and actually give your dog a correction that they're going to understand.
And I think that also goes back to what we've said multiple times is knowing your dog, knowing the dog that you have, you know, and it's something that I do think that the trust and respect thing, sort of thing, I think that can go both ways as well. You know, they should be able to obviously trust you and respect you as well. That, again, if you're giving them that instruction, they have to respect that you're doing it for a reason, right? Again, like we were saying, Bridget, like the dog doesn't always have to be in a command, but when I tell you to do something, I need you to do it. Don't not that they can ask questions, but you know what I mean? Like don't debate it. Don't try and don't try to run and try to like whatever. Just come and do it. Right?
Yeah. Questioning in dog training can look like your dog blowing you off. You say come to your dog and they're like sniffing the ground.
Yeah.
Like I had a beautiful session today. It was my 10th session with this dog that was so fearful of everything, and she said the last time she went to the dog beach before training, this dog was a nightmare. It was rolling in dead fish. One of the things he does is he starts following strangers. And she said he booked it down to the beach and he was just following a man. And she was calling him, and he was like, no. And today I was like, well, we're going to go repeat that session. And I showed her an alternative way. Like, we're going to have the dog on a long line at first. And we're going to let him go smell and be a dog. But the second you say come to him, I want him to come to you. And not that we're nagging him throughout the walk, but I said, let's pick 3 times within this walk that we're going to practice our recall. And the dog did beautifully. He was able to swim, and he started to go off because there was another dog. She called him to it. He booked it right back to her, and she was like, this is incredible. This is exactly what I wanted. And that's just like so beautiful to be able to offer that to your dog.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, going back to the video I posted with Snoop, with him just like running full speed in this field, like, you can't tell me that there's anything that would have made him happier.
Right.
Like, that is his happy place, is running. You've seen him. He loves to run. Sprinting. And I would never be able to, it doesn't matter how, like, unless I had an acre fenced in yard, like, there's no way. And even then it's like, what if he slips under the fence? What if there's so many things. What if there's a hawk and he won't come to me? Like, so many little things. Like, there's no way I could offer him that freedom without me worrying.
Yeah.
You know, without being able to train the way that we train and not overcomplicating things. And being like, oh, I need a 100-foot long line, and I need all of these high-value treats, and I need...
Yeah. That can be really difficult.
His sprint is like Lumos's trot.
I know!
He's trying so hard.
so hard. He's running, and his little breast, he goes...
Yeah.
As he's running, it's so freaking cute.
I love, like, my ideal session for Sunday that I'm deeming as successful is being able to have her fully off leash. And I took her to that session earlier just to kind of show an example, and she was just chilling, and she's like, she's not walking in a heel next to you. I'm like, no, not right now. She can go be a dog and get dirty and sandy and smelly. And she had a great time.
Yes. Yeah, the more that you're clear and consistent in what your boundaries are, the less, like, nagging and controlling and forceful that you ultimately have to be with your dog.
And I think, like, I'm very, very pro using a lot of food. I really like a lot of positive reinforcement. I love to have that engagement. But I was training a very good friend her dog right now, and she was like, he doesn't have any engagement on the walks with me because he's so interested in sniffing. And I was like, let's not worry about him looking back at you or checking. Let's start pinpointing the behavior we don't like to. And he was, once he got into the sniffing, he was really pulling her. So we put an end to that. And then throughout the walk, we started to see him check in so much more with her because he knew the boundary. And then we can go back in with that food. And then we can build the engagement. Yeah. But to try to nag him and put food in his face and be like, you have to look at me. It's just a roundabout way of helping the issue. And of course, you can do it like that if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
It's going to take weeks.
But they're still never going to know that initial behavior that's unwanted is wrong until you address it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it was a really good, it ended up being like just a lovely session to start to see this, my friend and her dog be able to like just have a really nice walk.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about like when you break those like or get over those hurdles sometimes and seeing the dog truly understand what it is that either you don't want them to do or you do want them to do. That's like the best feeling in the world for me. You know, it's just being able to, like you were saying, address the issue and then him checking back in every once in a while, whatever, and just at least, even if he doesn't know exactly what it is, he's at least like, let me just like check, you know, let me just see, or the dog like starts walking ahead and then they like catch to themselves and they're like, oh shit, got it back, you know, and they start like kind of fixing themselves back, you know, like that's what you want. You know, you don't want to have to be constantly doing this every 3 seconds.
And then your frustration is building with the dog, and that squanders your relationship with the dog. So you're nagging it the entire walk.
Yeah.
And you're like, am I having a good time with this?
And inevitably, because it doesn't work, people give up. And that is so much the power of negative reinforcement and the fact that like they're constantly pulling and the dog's just going back and they're pulling and going back. Like, you are using negative reinforcement to train your dog to pull.
Yeah.
Because, and I would argue that negative reinforcement, like long term, what you create with negative reinforcement probably lasts the longest of any of the quadrants. In my experience. So like if you're not careful in how you're almost inadvertently using negative reinforcement, and by negative reinforcement, I'm talking about the actual like 4 quadrants of like moving something aversive to basically drive the dog forward into doing a specific behavior. And if you're not concerned with like trying to figure out what you might be inadvertently doing with that, you can create a whole mess for yourself with things like that. That's how I feel like reactivity gets so bad with dogs. Because the dog reacts and then the owners are just yanking around and then it's like this whole thing and you kind of inadvertently create it and make it worse at that point.
It's like, I want to live a life that I feel like I'm not constantly frustrated with my dog and constantly feeling like I have to micromanage them. And that's not fun for anybody. No. You know, you want a life with your dog. Like I heard you talking to a client earlier in the lobby. And you're like, the goal of corrections is that it's always going to be there, but we don't have to offer them because the dog is going to start to pattern in things. And people have this idea that like just because we're using the e-collar long term doesn't mean that we're using the e-collar long term. Just because you have to put it on for the walks or when people are coming over or whatever doesn't mean you always have to use it if you're being consistent. If the rules are clear, then you should be good. And
it doesn't mean that the magic is in them wearing it. Oh, when my dog is wearing the collar, they behave different. Yeah. That's a problem. That shouldn't be happening. The collar is on because the likelihood that a mistake will be made or they make a wrong choice increases in those settings where there's higher distractions. And I never want to be caught in a setting where maybe a wrong choice might be more likely to be made and I don't have something to enforce. Because then you get stuck in a position where, okay, so my dog blew me off on their recall outside off leash. I was unprepared. I didn't have the e-collar on to enforce it. And so now they're more likely to try that again next time. Because they're like, oh, that'll work.
Opportunistic.
Exactly.
You let them know what they can do or they think they can do. Of course they're going to keep doing it.
Exactly.
My one thing that like, I definitely understand, like I'm not judging people, but time and time again when we're first starting training, they're like, and I didn't even have to correct them after I said no. Because they just stopped. And I was like, anytime you say no to your dog, you need to be able to correct it. Like, I'm not absolutely perfect with that. But I'd say like 98% of the time, if I say no, I really try to have some form of correction.
Well, because it's important to remember that the no is not the punishment. The no is the marker.
Yes.
And I think I've started really going in detail about those and almost covering every scenario that could possibly come up on why they wouldn't hit that button. And I think just preemptively talking about that with people really helps to get them to understand why it's so important.
Certainly.
Because if you mark the behavior, you still have to give the punishment for it.
Right.
The marker is just pinpointing it, like that right there. That's why you're getting the correction. And that's another extension of what I was talking to her in the lobby earlier, is that the goal is not to get to where no works and all you have to do is say no and they stop. The goal is that I shouldn't even have had to say no in the first place, because we've just completely eradicated the behavior at that point.
Yes.
That's why I, again, think it's so exhausting to me to see people teaching like leave-its and offs and like all this stuff when it's like, just correct them. The only value I see in maybe in a leave-it is in the context of you have a dog that is allowed to engage with something sometimes, but then other times not, and you need to be able to distinguish for them when that is, you know? So like, for instance, like with Lumos, a lot of times when I'm doing distraction training with dogs and they're off leash and stuff, I'll tell him, like, go say hi. He goes over and he'll sniff the dog, again, when they're both off leash and everything, to kind of engage the dog so that then the owner can try to do a recall while that's happening. And then I could see the only time that maybe a leave-it is useful is maybe in that context where if I wanted to stop.
Yeah.
You know? But even then, it's like, I could just say come or, you know, stuff like that. There's other options. Yeah. But, like, that's the only time I would say that that's useful. Similar to, like, teaching an out for dropping things that they're allowed to have, but you need them to drop it.
Or, when people say down when their dogs are jumping on them.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're like, down. No.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the dog is like, what exactly do you want me to do?
It's important to remember. I think it's when distinguishing between the stuff, it's important to look at, like, do I need them to stop doing something or do I need them to do something? And that will determine whether you need to give a correction or whether you need to give a command.
Yes.
If you need them to stop doing something, like stop eating socks, stop jumping, stop getting on the counter, those types of things, then you need to just give a correction for that. Because you don't need anything in return. You just need them to stop doing that. If you need them to not pull on a leash, to get that, you need them to know how to not pull on a leash and how to walk nicely.
Give them the alternative.
Yeah, if you need them to sit, if you need them to go to the bed, if you need them to come, all of those are things that is a solicited behavior. Therefore, you need to teach it.
Yeah.
And they need to know what it is. But I feel like that's the most simplistic way of breaking it down. Like, are you stopping something or are you asking them to do something? And that determines what route you take.
Then you can give corrections once they understand
for
what they're supposed to do.
Yes, for non-compliance with things.
And then going back to also like the behavioral stuff you're correcting for, like the example we were saying before, the fence jumping or fence fighting, whatever. Yes, it's just stop doing the one thing I don't want you to do.
Exactly.
Other than that, do whatever else you want to do. I don't care. Just don't do that one thing. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why with a lot of times with reactivity, like reactivity in the house and the yard, I can have people start working on right away because it's just an e-collar correction. Versus reactivity on a leash, I'm like, that's a little more convoluted.
Yeah.
You know, because not only do we need them to stop doing something, but in order for them to stop doing something, they also need to know what to do in that context because they don't have like a whole backyard to just like avoid and go away, you know? It is a little bit different.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I feel like it's okay to make things a process in an area where it truly needs to be a process. But if you're creating a process to simply just avoid giving a correction or being upfront with your dog, that's just too exhausting.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah.
You're not being clear.
No, just be clear.
Yes. Be a leader.
Yeah.
Right?
Be the leader of the pack.
Yes.
If Caesar Milan may have a word.
Like Ivan always says, and almost in every podcast he brings it up because he's like, this is not that complicated, guys. He's like, dogs approach things that are pleasurable and they avoid things that are unpleasurable. It's as simple as that. He's like, that is how they are in nature.
Yep.
If we can replicate that in training, it just simplifies things like so much.
I think that was good.
Yeah.
Are we done? I think we're done.
Yeah.
We've already gone over our time.
Oh, okay.
Well, thanks for joining us today,
Yes.
guys. Go get yourself a Grimace shake at McDonald's.
I hear they're great.
Oh, it is his birthday.
It is Grimace's birthday.
It is. She's been on it with these shakes.
Have you got one?
The Grimace shake, 10 out of 10.
Is it like blueberry or something?
Yes, it's like blueberry vanilla.
I'm gonna need one of those.
It's absolutely fantastic.
It sounds delicious.
I know what we're doing.
Yep.
All right. Cheers.
Bye guys.
Bye.
See ya.